So we're going to resume from where we left off then and look at the final type of Power App that we've got available to us, which is our Power Apps portals. So what are all these about then? So we'll discuss first of all in terms of, what they are, as we just said, and also as well the value that they provide and the typical sort of uses cases where we would typically want to use a portal within the organization. And then really from there, we're just going to take a high level look at some of the features and capabilities of portals. And again, the emphasis really is just high level understanding in terms of how we would go about and create a portal and how we perform some basic configuration. This is all we're really looking for in here as part of this. And we'll also just have a look at some of the different security options that the portal provides us with, which is particularly beneficial if we're wanting to be in a scenario where maybe we are exposing out information from our own environment for our portal users to consume. So Power Apps Portal, so this has been around for a few years now. So it was previously, if you previously used to work with CRM portals or ADX Studio, then some of this might be familiar. Microsoft acquired ADX Studio a couple of years ago and gradually began to bring this application into, first of all, Dynamics 365 and now more generally as part of the Power Platform. So effectively what we get with this is the ability to generate and manage our own sort of portal that is linked very closely to Microsoft Dataverse. The emphasis here being that we don't need to go off and write a bespoke application to accommodate this functionality. We've got the ability of being able to build and generate a branded, personalized portal that can help to deliver self-service capabilities for our sort of external sort of users. And again, going back to what we discussed earlier, external can mean both maybe internal employees, internal colleagues, perhaps who don't have a Power Apps license, and can also be taken to mean maybe our own customers or maybe other organizations that we work with. From here, we can sort of provide that self-service capability. We can look to maybe engage better with our customers and with our audiences. We can maybe look to build out some form of maybe employee engagement tool. So maybe this will be our HR portal that our colleagues can log into and obviously provide information. And they can also act as a good way of being able to engage a wider mobile workforce who perhaps don't always maybe have their own sort of devices or have a traditional sort of laptop, PC, whatever it may be. As you mentioned, Power Apps portals and Dataverse are really closely linked together. If we want to have a portal set up, we need to have a corresponding Dataverse environment to go along with it. The Dataverse environment will be used not only to store all of the information, and configuration relating to our portal, but can also then be used to expose out other information points that we may have customized in the Dataverse environment. So what this means is that any table within the common data model and also as well any custom tables that we've built can be very quickly and easily exposed out into the portal. So for example, if we're using, let's say, some of the case management functionality within Dynamics 365 customer service that's linked to Dataverse, we could then create that portal and then users will be able to go in, view, and maybe even create or edit cases. And effectively what happens in the portal is then reflected back in our Dynamics 365 application. So it provides a really good mechanism to quickly and easily provide these external facing capabilities. So in order for us to get started with a portal, we would need to first of all go into the Maker portal. And then from there, we've got the option of being able to create a new blank portal. If we've just got a standard Power Apps license, then it will be the only option that we will see. If, however, we've got an applicable Dynamics 365 license, then what we'll also see at the bottom, as you can see in this screenshot, is options for a few additional portal types. So we can have, for example, customer self-service, a partner portal, a community portal, a few different options there that we can then spin up and then customize to suit our own particular purpose. At the moment, we can only one Power Apps portal can be provisioned for each Dataverse environment. There is some stuff, I believe, early in preview at the moment, which will mean that restriction is removed. But for the time being, that is we should just keep that in mind that is the limitation. In terms of setting up a portal, it's really straightforward. So if we jump into the Maker portal, all we need to do is go into the Home tab up here. or go to apps more correctly. If you click on new app at the top, like here, we'll see an option for portal. Because we've got just standard PowerApps licenses on this particular tenant, the portal from blank option is the only applicable option that we would receive here. And then all we just need to do is start to just put in some details about our particular portal. So maybe just call this my PL-900 demo portal. I'll just call this PL-900 demo 1902 2022. We can specify a language or also use data from an existing website record if we've already maybe previously installed a portal into the environment. Otherwise, we just hit on the create button down here. And then what will happen is that behind the scenes, the portal will start to be configured. Now, this process can take some time, particularly if it's the first time that we're installing a portal into the environment. It basically has to go off and add in a load of functionality into the Dataverse environment. So generally speaking, it can take anywhere between maybe 30 minutes to maybe an hour or longer. You can keep checking back into the portal at any time. In addition, you'll also receive an email confirmation through once the portal has been provisioned. So just leave that provision in the background, and then we'll just return to do a bit more of a demo of this in a short while. So similar to our other app types, we've got a few different sort of core components, which again, we just need to have a bit of a general awareness of when it comes to the exam itself, and also really more generally. If we wanted to jump into more detailed discussion and more focus on these topics, then this is probably moving more into the territory of the PL-400 exam. So let's just jump in and just look at each of these individually. So similar to model-driven and Canvas apps, we've got our own sort of portal studio interface that we would use to customize the portal. So again, it's a separate studio, but the general sort of experience is quite similar to what we saw with our Canvas apps. On the left-hand side, we've got a command bar that allows us to sort of go in and add in additional content, view the structure of our website. We've got a nice expansive, WYSIWYG type editor that we can use to get out that real-time sort of real-time view in terms of how our portal actually will look for end users. Then on the right hand side, for each of the currently selected components that we're working with, we've got various different properties that we can modify. Things like the name of the page, partial URLs, formatting settings, a variety of different things there. At the bottom, we've got some options there to be able to see whether or not the web current page has been saved or not. And we can also actually go in and view the underlying HTML snippet and code being used by the page. There may be certain scenarios where we may need to go in and perform some manual modifications against those, depending on what we're trying to do. Now at the top, and then towards the top right of the screen, we can see some options that will allow us to push out the latest content to our website and to navigate through onto there. So whenever we make any changes to our portal, we always need to make sure that we perform that configuration sync just to ensure that those latest changes are surfaced out on our live site. Now, our portal will be made up of the following different elements. So first of all, is our web page. This is just like any standard page on any website, and will always be identified by a unique URL. Ultimately, you'll have a sort of a hierarchical sort of parent-child relationship on your particular website. You'll have a root home page, and then from there, other sort of web pages will then be sort of descended from the parent, and that all together will form the sitemap of our particular portal. Then to help us in terms of just managing and more easily ensuring consistency across our different web pages on the portal, we can have one or several different page templates set up that we can then link to a web page, and this will help define things such as the layout, the behavior, what header or footer to use, or various different things we can define as part of this. We can best think of these perhaps maybe as the blueprint for each of the different web pages that we set up. We can look to edit our web pages through the studio that we just saw in the previous slide. We can also go into the Dataverse environment and actually make these modifications behind the scenes as well. What we get when we spin up a portal for the first time is that a model-driven app, the portal management app, is installed into the environment. And we can then use that just to go in and actually view and change all of the various configuration data pertaining to our portal. It's really just up to us in terms of what experience would we prefer to work with, either the studio or this particular management app. Now, a portal site will be powered by various different snippets or content snippets that basically control things like, okay, logos, control things like, the layout of a page, the layout of a header, of a footer, can maybe just be plain text snippets. So it could be something like maybe our company address and further details and other template processing instructions that that will perform certain actions as users enter different sort of pages. So behind the scenes, PowerApps portals use liquid templating quite extensively. If you had any previous experience working with Shopify, then it's the same sort of concepts that you can apply here. And using liquid templating, we can have things like, okay, conditional logic for rendering of pages. We can maybe, base a page context off a dynamic query. Lots of different options there in terms of just to make it flexible in terms of how pages are viewed by end users of the portal. So you can see an example of a content snippet that's included by default in the system. This is one for the mobile header. We can just make some very quick and easy modifications to this, maybe change the logo that's being used, modify the text. Once that's applied, every page on the website that references this particular content snippet will then pull in the latest changes. And again, we can look to maybe work or edit these from within either the Studio app, or as we can see in this example here, we can go into the Portal Management app and make modifications through there. Now, one of the main strengths of PowerApps portals is the fact that it can interact with information and data that is stored within Dataverse. And we primarily would use entity lists and entity forms to define what data should render on the portal from Dataverse. So this could be maybe a list of rows from a table, or it could be maybe a specific form that will capture and display data for a row from within Dataverse. So we can look to link a web page record to either an entity list or an entity form, or maybe even both. The linked list or form will be used by the template to render the page layout with data from Dataverse. So we could include things like maybe our active contacts view. We could put that above the member directory list. On the properties pane on the right of the above example, you'll see that this table list was created to display the active contacts view from the contacts table. When it comes to our lists, we can add in and include additional functionality such as filtering and sorting. We can also have actions associated with them to enable things such as maybe create, edit, or read abilities, and also perhaps trigger workflows behind the scenes as well. So as part of all of this, app makers can determine what will happen when a user opens a record from a list, and then we can maybe take them to a particular form, maybe redirect them to somewhere else on the site. It's entirely up to us in terms of how we want to configure that logic. Now, the default portal that we spin up will have a sort of a basic theme set up for it. So typically we'd want to just go into there and make some modifications to that, typically to ensure that it's, again, it matches against our branding style. So the first thing we'll do is maybe we'd look to maybe disable the basic theme if it's been disabled, and then maybe look to enable one of the other themes that come shipped with the portal. Themes can be changed at any time just by going into different areas of the particular application. And in fact, we can just maybe spend a few moments now looking at how we can work with and how we can modify the theme in a portal. So we first of all need to go into our portal. So I'm just going to select the one that I created earlier today. So I'm just going to click into it like so. So you can see on here, this is how the sample portal looks out of the box when we first configure it. So it's a very simple sort of site with just a couple of different pages, a contact us form, and then the ability to sign in at the very top. Oops. What we can look to do, if we go back onto the portal, onto the Maker portal, we can just click on Edit to open up the Studio. If we wanted to change the theme, we would click on the option on the left-hand side down there. We can see we've got the option of being able to enable the basic theme, which is currently disabled. And then from here, we can maybe choose one which is most appropriate. So perhaps maybe we want more of a green sort of look and feel to our portal. We can see that change is applied pretty much straight away. Alternatively, what we can look to do is create a brand new theme if we wanted to, using the option there. This will then allow us to then customize this particular theme, and we can then go in and, for example, we can make some modifications. We can work with a developer to be able to get them to maybe change the theme, maybe add on different colors, adjust them to suit our particular corporate branding guidelines. Alternatively, we notice on the right hand side over here we have got some basic options that we can configure. So we can perhaps maybe just change these to different sort of colors. So maybe we just want more of a sort of a greenish sort of color for that one, which takes effect straight away. We can just hit return or just click away from there like so. Change the various different sort of properties there. Maybe we want this more as a maybe a yellow maybe. Again, it's really just up to us in terms of how we configure all this. When we're ready, we just need to make sure that the changes have been saved up there. We can then hit the sync configuration button. It will take just a few moments to apply that onto the live site. And when that's done, we can just go onto here, do a bit of a Control F5 refresh. And we can see our new theme's been applied like so. So you don't necessarily need to be a web design expert to be able to go in and sort of just do some basic theming amends. However, typically for more advanced and more sort of bespoke, bespoke sort of requirements, that'll be where we would need to get a developer involved. Portals use something known as Bootstrap templating or Bootstrap themes, which is a fairly common thing that's used across websites such as Twitter and other areas. So it should be relatively straightforward for a developer to work with that and be able to build out a specific theme to suit the requirement. Now we have this concept of security with portals, which applies pretty strongly for where we want people to be able to sign in and be able to do specific action against the portal. And what this will allow us to do is control exactly who can do what on the portal. We also manage various different things such as each individual user's login. If we're using the local authentication provider, we can manage the user's passwords from within there. And we can also view contact information, email address, and other various different details relating to the current user, the users of our portal. So traditionally, from an authentication standpoint, you would have used the local authentication option. This is where, as I say, all of the passwords and all of the login details are stored in the portal itself. Generally, these days, the recommended option is to go for an external authentication option, which is a concept we'll return to in a few moments. This is to ensure that we're not storing, sensitive details within the Dataverse environment, and to provide a much more seamless experience for users of the portal, so they can choose the most appropriate sort of email address and account type to authenticate in with. Once the portal user has logged in or been authenticated for the first time, it would then be a case that they would then be authorized to do certain things on the portal. And we'd set up appropriate web roles that would then define the set of privileges that they can carry out. These web roles will allow us to control whether certain record types are visible or not, and whether the user can actually go on and do or access certain areas of the portal. And by and large, it will be up to us in terms of how we define all of that. So this list here gives an indication of some of the different external authentication options that we have available to us. This is where credentials and password management is handled by a different identity provider. The supported options include things like different OAuth 2 providers, so Microsoft, Twitter, Facebook, etc. We've got support for OpenID, which will typically be Azure Active Directory or B2C. We can also support WS Federation or SAML2 based authentication. And this will be applicable if we've got some form of on-premise Active Directory that we want to synchronize with. Generally, what you find is that the most popular option, if you're starting from a clean slate, is to use something like Azure Active Directory B2C. But again, this will typically, the exact sort of provider you use will vary based on your underlying requirements and what you're trying to achieve. It would be up to the portal administrator to be able to go in and enable or disable any combination of authentication options, and then when the user then navigates to the sign-in page, they can then select the most appropriate option based on their preference. Once the user has authenticated in, they will be associated with a contact in the system. And then from there, we can then define the different policies and rules that will then give the user permission to do certain things in the portal. We can also look to, at any point, share the portal with both internal and external users. And we can see on here, we've got a screen here that will appear when we do this, that shows us the steps that we need to do in order to share for both scenarios. Mainly though, when we will need to probably think about setting up one or several different web roles in the system. And it could be that a portal contact is assigned to one or more web roles at a specific time. We'd have different sort of access rules and permissions of individual roles set up, and then we can combine that all together to determine the resulting permission set. So effectively, what that means is that ultimately the privileges that the user has is dictated by all of their combined web roles that are assigned to them. So it's not going to be the case if we exclude permissions in one, but have it in the other, that it's going to get overwritten. Effectively, it's all just a cumulative process. By default in the portal, we get two types of web roles created for us. The first being anonymous and the second authenticated. These roles allow us to apply permissions and access rules to all portal users based on whether they are signed in or not. If a user is not signed in, they will view the portal with the anonymous web role permissions. And this will by default be the most restricted permissions, and we should ideally ensure that we always leave that as the most restricted one. We don't want to be in a situation where we're accidentally allowing all of our sort of account data to be navigated and to be accessed by all and sundry on the website, unless that is the intention of what we're trying to achieve with the portal. All right, okay, so that pretty much wraps it up for what we need to know when it comes to portals then. So before we move on, does anyone have any questions or anything that doesn't quite make sense? No? Okay. Okay, so that wraps it up for Power Apps then. So we're going to move on now and have a look at our next topic, which is Power Automate. So we're going to look at having a bit of an overview of Power Automate first of all, and discuss some of the ways in which we can use it to build out an automated solution. And really the goal and the object of the exam is that we want to be able to grasp the use cases for our different Power Automate flow types and have an appreciation in terms of how it all works end to end, and how it looks from a user's perspective. And so we'll see as part of the demos, we'll get a bit of a feel for that and see how we can sort of work with that in a bit more detail. It's worth mentioning at this point as well is that previously you may have heard of Power Automate referred to as a previous name, Microsoft Flow. This was renamed about sort of 3 years ago, but it might be that you still see some articles or some sort of legacy resources or content which refers to the old names. Just keep that in mind in your travels with this. So as we talked about at the start of today, the value that Power Automate can start to bring is all around these different type of automations that can range from anything, from things that we're trying to automate in our day-to-day lives, right through to automating some of our more complex and challenging processes in the organization. So if for example we're having to very regularly download email attachments and then upload these files into a database, then it could be that, using Power Automate, we can actually eliminate this and actually completely automate this end to end. So really what's happening with Power Automate is that we're letting the computer manage these different repetitive tasks for us behind the scenes. And from a usability standpoint, it should be relatively straightforward for anyone with knowledge of a particular business process to jump into Power Automate and create a repeatable flow that when triggered will leap into action and perform the desired process. So we can see, an example of the different sort of common scenarios and capabilities that we can use as part of Power Automate flow. Some of the more challenging scenarios that Power Automate can also look at as well is around automating desktop-based processes using robotic processing automation or RPA capabilities. We also have, as part of Power Automate flows, a very powerful approval engine that we can use. So, whether we've got a simple or maybe more complex set of steps which need to have manual intervention or approvals that we can authorize from email, from Teams, or from other areas, then potentially Power Automate could be a good tool for us to consider compared to us building out our own solution. So what we've got here in a bit more sort of minute detail is, a series of different and of I should say many different example templates available to us in Power Automate. So, if we've got maybe a scenario which is fairly common, it could be that there's already a template ready to go. All we need to do is just select the appropriate template, configure a few details, and then we've got our full end-to-end workflow ready to go. We've got the ability of being able to automate across different apps and services. It says 300 plus here, but I believe it's well over 350 plus different connectors now, with lots of different options available to us. As we talked about at the start of the day as well, if we had our own bespoke API or bespoke service wanted to bring into the equation, then we can also use custom connectors. So, conceivably, Power Automate can connect to any application or service. The difficulty in terms of how that looks will vary, but ultimately we can say that with relative confidence. We've got good integration across the entire stack as part of this. So, connectors available for our different Azure services, for our different Microsoft 365 and Dynamics 365 services. And if we're using the on-premise gateway, as we mentioned at the start of today, this will allow us to integrate our Power Automate flows across our different on-premise software and cloud services. So again, it becomes very easy for us to do that in a secure fashion. We don't have to go out and expose a load of IP addresses in our on-premise estate just so we can access our SQL Server database. With the on-premise gateway, we can create that secure tunnel, and it's all accessible from within the Power Platform. So a good example in terms of how we can use Power Automate is discussed here in the next sort of couple of slides. And again, it involves this sort of approval type sort of process, which is often a really good usage case when it comes to Power Automate flows. And the process looks a little bit like this. So we've set up maybe a Canvas Power App that we're using to manage some form of a purchase order request process. So in the app, maybe somebody fills in some details. They press a button and that then kicks off this particular flow on here. We can look to maybe feed in some additional information to here, such as maybe the username, who is maybe in the app, who is completing the various different steps. And from here, we can then call the Microsoft 365 or one of the Microsoft 365 endpoints and be able to get back details of the current user's manager. With those details retrieved, we can then go on and start an approval process. This will then create and assign the approval to the user's line manager. They'll then receive some details through about the purchase order request, which they can then review and obviously make sure that it all looks okay. If it's rejected, then maybe we could send out an email back to the original user to then just inform them that their approval has been rejected and include maybe as part of that some reasons why that's the case. If it's approved, then we can maybe have some additional conditional processing or evaluation that will just determine, okay, what's the total value of the purchase order. If it's below $10,000, then we can approve it without any causing any problems. Otherwise, we need to escalate the approval to the vice president of the organization, and then assuming that they approve it, we can then proceed as we intended. So this type of process becomes very easy and I guess somewhat trivial to set up from a Power Automate perspective. And you can see we can very quickly get this implemented and set up to suit our particular scenario. So when we talk about Power Automate, we're referring more generally to three different types of flows that fit within this overall sort of name. So the first and the most common one when we're talking about flows and this is the product that used to be known as Microsoft Flows, is our event-driven flows. Sometimes you may hear these referred to as cloud flows. These are the ones that we described earlier, where you have them as maybe a single trigger with one or multiple different actions that then fire based on that. We can add on as many of these that suit our particular purpose, thanks in part to the wide array of different connectors available to us. These flows will be available from within the Power Automate portal. We will just need to navigate through into the My Flows or the Team Flows area in the Power Automate portal, which is where we'll jump into in a short while. Cloud flows can also be added into our Microsoft Dataverse solutions as well, which means we can then push them out very easily into different environments and ensure we've got a nice sort of healthy ALM process behind that. Next, we've got our business process flows. These are used to augment the experience when using model-driven apps and also Dataverse. And we can use these to build out a guided experience, a series of sequential steps with some conditional branching and logic if necessary that a user needs to complete in order to satisfy a particular process. Business process flows are used quite extensively across the various Dynamics 365 applications, and they're one of these features that again have been inherited from the Dynamics CRM days. As I say, we typically we'd need to ensure that we've got a Dataverse environment set up if we wanted to use them. And then finally, we've got our desktop flows, and these can sometimes be referred to as UI flows or RPA flows. And this is where we would go onto the desktop of our machine. We'd record ourselves completing a series of different sort of steps from within maybe our desktop applications or our web browser. From there, those series of steps can be triggered at any particular time to perform that process for us. We could, as part of this, we can look to maybe parameterize different steps. We can pass data in and out, and make it so this process is as optimized as possible. Typically, we would use desktop flows for those more difficult or challenging sort of last mile integrations, maybe for situations where we've got a application system on premise where we don't have any sort of published or available APIs to be able to get in and perform the actions that we want. Or it could just be a particularly challenging automation where there's lots of different manual steps involved in order to get us to our end destination. We would primarily use Power Automate Desktop as our main sort of tool for authoring these flows, which would then be stored and saved within the Power Automate portal. This desktop application is included part and parcel of Windows 11 if you've been fortunate enough to upgrade. Otherwise, you can navigate onto the Microsoft Store and you'll see that it's available on there as an app that you can install. So the focus really for us today is more on the event-driven flows and in terms of the demos, and I guess as well in terms of the exam, that's what you just need to have the good awareness of. So we're not really going to be looking too much at business process flows or desktop flows again today. However, just keep them in mind and just be aware of what they are and the potential use cases. So as I mentioned, business process flows for a series of different steps that we need to complete in order to satisfy a set of conditions. And then finally, desktop flows for those RPA, more challenging integrations that we want to be able to, automations, I should say, that we want to be able to execute either in attended or unattended mode. Now, to help augment some of the capabilities that we can see here within flows, we can also look to bring in some AI builder capabilities. So we got a taste of this earlier on when we were looking at the business card scan and control. This is one of the available models that we can deploy out across the Power Platform, and one that we can use specifically within our Canvas apps. When it comes to Power Automate, we've got an expanded list of other AI models that we can use as part and parcel of our flows. So for example, we can do things like, for example, we can have a form processor. So let's assume that maybe we've got a process where we're getting invoices through to a mailbox, on a regular basis, and somebody in our accounts team is having to go out and download the invoices and manually input these into our accounting system. That's obviously quite a laborious and quite a sort of tedious process. So what we could look to do is train a model based on the structure of the invoices that we're receiving through. And then from there, the form processor could then be deployed to track whenever a new email comes through, extract out the document and all of its core attributes using a sort of OCR scan, and then save that down into our accounting system. So that's the sort of things that we can do with the form processor, but we typically would need to train the underlying model based on various different sort of data, training data that we've got. Other things we can do, things like object detection, so be able to sort of pick out a particular object in a picture. Again, we would need to maybe train that. We can do some prediction-based modeling. This works particularly well when we're using Dataverse. So we can target a data within the Dataverse sort of model and do some training on that, and then make predictions based on that. We've got things like text classification. We can analyze sentiment. We can do entity and keyword extraction. We've even got the ability of being able to do translation as well, to be able to take language in English and convert it out into French, German, Chinese. There's quite a lot of different options now these days. So the AI builder capability.
Could I perhaps could I perhaps ask a question? Is that like, sure. I'm so sorry, I'm into chatbots. So is that also on the spot? Is it possible to translate immediately, to switch languages, etc.? Yeah, it's not like common on every platform at all. So I was wondering about the capabilities.
Yeah, so how it works is you feed it in a body of text. You can also tell it which language it is, but it can also figure that out as well. And then, yeah, within a few seconds, it will return a sort of machine translation of that text in the language that you've indicated. So it generally works pretty fast, actually. And the quality of the translations is usually seems to be pretty okay as well, which is good.
Wow, that's great. Thanks.
Yeah, we'll jump into a demo shortly, maybe show you that in a bit more detail.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, so we can do quite a lot of interesting things across the different AI builder capabilities. What's even better now with a lot of this AI builder stuff as well is that previously it used to be just a premium only feature that we'd have to just pay a bit more money each month to be able to consume. But we now get a sort of a free and limited entitlement included as part of all of our Power App subscriptions. It's not a lot, but at least for maybe small scenarios or limited use cases, it could be something worth looking at. But definitely some good stuff here if we can deploy it in the right way. So another customer scenario on here. So TrueGreen are using Power Automate capability quite sort of extensively. They use a handful of the different connectors available for the Power Platform to connect to their traditional data sources. As part of using these capabilities, they were able to get a working prototype set up and running within 2 days. And the main advantage of this is they didn't even have to write any sort of lines of code whatsoever to do that. As part of their particular processes, they have systems that didn't have any documented or available APIs to be used by the connectors. So what they did here was that they used desktop flows to be able to mimic on-screen actions that customer service associates use to then perform that customer service agents would do manually. And all of this was really sort of nicely automated using Power Automate. What they were also able to do as well is actually leverage some Power Virtual Agent capability as well. So they were able to interact with their customers via their different sort of websites and facing experiences. Based on the customer's intent, they were then able to take action in the most sort of meaningful way. And the organization is now using this capability quite extensively across the organization. So if you want to find out more about this, if you just search TrueGreen case study Power Platform in your search engine of choice, you'll be able to find out more about this. But now let's just jump in and just do a demonstration of Power Automate. We'll have a quick look at the portal and then maybe build out just an example flow to show you what's all involved here. So I'm going to return to the Maker portal first of all. I'll just close down some of these tabs because we don't need them for the time being. I think it may have gone for a nap again during the lunch break, maybe. Give it a second.
Power naps.
Power naps, yes, love it. Oh yeah, I could definitely do with a power nap. If not, let's try another way because we don't want to sit here waiting all day. Actually, it might be my internet. Let me just check something on here. Yes, it is. Let me just stop something there. Yeah, something downloading in the background. Anyway, let's proceed and hope for the best. Here we go. So if we're already in one of our Microsoft 365 apps or services, then the quickest way of being able to get into here is by just clicking on apps, the little waffle icon at the top. There we can see we've got an option there for Power Automate, which will take us through to this view over here. And similar to our sort of Power Apps example that we saw earlier, we get a nice little sort of landing screen on here that shows us all the different things that we can do in the portal, including setting up a flow or accessing different learning paths. We've got the concept of environments that also applies when it comes to our flows. So typically we want to make sure that we've got the appropriate number of environments set up and then have our flows deployed out into there. The action items area is where we would see things like our approvals, for example. So we can go into here, we can sort of see what's been passed to us to sort of review and approve. We'll return to this area in a short while. In the My Flow section, we can see a list of everything that we've got in terms of our cloud flows, any applicable desktop flows, business process flows. If a flow has been shared with us, or if we've shared a flow out with other users, then it will appear underneath the Shared With Me tab over there. So if you're sometimes wondering, okay, well, where's my flow gone? I can't find it anymore. Then sometimes just go into here, you'll be able to find it very quickly. Under templates down here, we can see a list of all the various different example flows that are available for us to install. And these are generally grouped by the different sort of scenarios. So we've got flows here for remote work, flows involving the button, flows involving Visio, lots of different examples on here that we're free to leverage. So if we're just playing about with flows for the very first time and just trying to find our feet, then it could be just looking through and maybe just testing out some of these examples. It could be a good idea. For our purposes today, what we're going to do is we're going to create just a brand new flow from scratch. So what I'm going to do, I'll have this as an instant cloud flow. So what this will be a flow that I can trigger at any time, but just by either running it in the portal, or if I had the Power Automate mobile app installed on my phone, I could just press a button on there and I could then trigger the flow that way if I wanted to. There's my PL-900 sample as an example. Select that trigger there and then go to create like so. So this particular trigger, we can do some things such as like have different data points that we want to accept as the endpoint. So as well as pressing a button, we can maybe provide some additional information at runtime that can then control how the flow runs. So in this case, let's try and do a flow that maybe involves something to do with maybe translation. So we could do something like, I don't know, text translate as an example. And then this will need to be provided each time the flow runs. As we mentioned earlier, our flow must always have a single trigger, but we can then have as many different actions as we want, but we must always make sure we've got at least one action that we're calling. So in this case, let's have a look at some of the AI Builder capabilities on here. So if I click on AI Builder here, we can see a list of all the different actions that we can do. So we can do things like detect language, we can use some of the image detection modeling, extract information from forms, lots of different things there. Some of these may require us to go away and do some specific setup. So for example, we need to, if we wanted to do some image detection type stuff, we would need to go off and train some images first of all, stuff like that. But others can be used fairly quickly off the shelf. So for example, with the text translation one, this is one of the off the shelf ones that we can use. Now we could just hard code in the text we want to translate, but what we can do with our flows is that we can make things a little bit dynamic. So when we click on any of these different inputs on here, we'll notice that we have a pane open on the right hand side. This then allows us to parameterize or supply dynamic content for this particular step. So if we scroll on this list down here, we should be able to see we've got an option there for text to translate that we can feed in alongside some of these other properties that are automatically collected when the user presses the button. So we'll do text to translate like so. We can then select what we want to translate the text into. So we can see we've got quite a lot of different sort of options here. What we'll probably do today, given this is the, well, there's no, we won't do Dutch, let's do French, shall we, for today. And we've also got the option of being able to either let the AI Builder detect the language automatically, or we can just basically tell it what language we're doing. But as I say, generally it does a good job of figuring that out. What we then want to do is then maybe use the approval engine. Maybe we just want to do some text translation, then maybe assign it to somebody in the organization who actually does speak the language to be able to, assess and make sure that the machine hasn't made an absolute dog's dinner of it all. So what we can do, if we type in approve or approval, we can do something like start and wait for an approval. So this will be where we want to, everyone must approve. So call this approved text translation. For the purposes of this demo, I'll just assign the approval to me. MOD administrator, so there he is, or there they are. And then we can just put in some details on here. So the nice thing is that this supports Markdown, so we can do headings. So text translation review. So please review and approve the following translation. And do something like in bold, original text. So again, we can use our dynamic content down here to sort of just parameterize that all. So translated text. And then we should see that, yep, for the AI Builder step here, we've got a translated text option that we can feed in. What we can sometimes do is also add in links to items to approve as well, which is generally recommended, but for the purpose of this demo, we won't worry too much about that. And then we want to maybe take some action once it's been approved. So what we can do is add a condition on. The approval step will have an outcome. So if it is not equal to reject, maybe we want to go off and maybe in Dataverse just create a new I don't know, a new row. So just as an example, so I don't know, maybe create a new account. Maybe to make this a bit more relevant, maybe just we can have an input for account name. So maybe we can make that dynamic. And maybe we just want to have descriptions for our accounts in the relevant language, perhaps. That's our scenario. So the account name, and then we can maybe for the description, where's it gone? Where's, there it is, at the top. So let's pop in our translated text there. So yeah, so that's our flow ready to go. It probably would be recommended that we go in and just maybe rename some of these different steps, because otherwise what you end up with is like, you know, if you're using multiple of the same steps, you have like add a row, add a new row 2, add a new row 3, etc. It just makes it quite difficult to figure out what it's doing. But we'll be a little bit naughty today, and we'll just sort of save that for now. If there's any issues with the flow checker up here will sort of show us that here, as well as any warnings. So warnings won't prevent the flow from being saved, but if there are any errors, then we will be prevented from saving the flow. And then what we can then do is then run a test of this flow to make sure that it's working as we expect. It's going to be a manual action that we want to test this with. We just need to confirm that it's using the approvals, which is like so, and then we can see here the inputs that we want to type in. So we'll do something like, I don't know, what's a good company name? Maybe, I don't know, Fabricam Associates. And text to translate, maybe something like, this company does a lot of work in France, especially in Paris. We think they will be a great company to work with. And then we can then run the flow like so. And then assuming that I've not made a huge and obvious mistake, that should all run fine behind the scenes. So it's been able to get over the initial hurdle with the translation. So it's now moving on to the approval step. What's quite nice is that as the flow is running, and even after the flow is run, we can go in and we can view each specific step in here. So I can expand out, I can review all the different inputs and outputs, so I can see the exact information that went in and out there. And if I wanted to, I could get a little sneak peek down here in terms of the translation that's been done. But now, because it's on the approval step, the flow is just sat there waiting. And if I was to go open up a new browser tab and check my approvals, I'll just need to sign in. I should have a new approval request waiting to go. I need to make sure I'm in the right environment. Approvals. Yep, so there we go. New approval on here. We can see the markdown has made that into a nice big heading. Then we can see the original text down there. I don't know if we have got any French speakers on the call, whether they could rate that translation, but it looks pretty okay to me, unless anyone's got any objections. I can see a thumbs up, so good. So yeah, let's just approve that then. Yep. Wow, what a great translation. Confirm that like so. If we return back to here, this should all go green in a second. Yep, and then the flow should run to conclusion. Yep, so we've now got a new account row for Fabricam Associates. Let us jump in and just have a quick view of that in Dataverse to make sure it's all looking okay. So I think I've got an app here which we can use. So this is a bit of a dumping ground environment. I've been teaching Power Platform all week, so this is my go-to environment. So I think the sample app has it in. Let's have a look. Nope. Let's try this one. Yeah, accounts. So we should be able to see, yep, Fabricam Associates. And if we go to details, there we go. There's our translation over there. So yeah, all seems to be working fine, which is good. Yeah, and again, we can just go in and just inspect details over here, see what information points have been created. So this can be quite useful for just from a debugging standpoint. You know, if something fails at a particular step, we can go back in and just actually see the precise point where it's failed, you know, and just you know, make some variations until it's all working as we want it to. What we can also do is, if we go to the flow page itself, excuse me, not only do we get some information about, you know, when the flow is created or modified, but we can see a full run history up to 28 days. So we can see whether or not it succeeded or failed. And also what's quite nice is that we can resubmit any failed run. So maybe something goes wrong, maybe there's like a transient issue, the API is down or whatever. We can use this to very quickly run and rerun it and just, yeah, make sure that our automation works as we want it to. Some other options is we can look to maybe share the flow out to other users on the organization so they can go in and then view it and work with it. We can see lots of different connections in use as well. And if we wanted to, we could add this flow into the solution that we created earlier on. If this would assume that maybe we're wanting to get this pushed out into another environment. So we just go to add existing, automation cloud flow, and then we should be able to see, where's it gone? Then yeah, there sometimes will be some flows that you can't add into a solution unless you create them in there, so that might be why that's not visible. But yeah, we can, if we wanted to, include them in a solution. So yeah, lots we can do with flows, particularly with cloud flows, and hopefully, as you've been able to see, very easy and straightforward to be able to run them as well, and also set them up. So okay, cool. So does anyone have any questions then before we move on? No? Okay. So we're going to look at the second lesson now in this module, which is all about building an automated solution using Power Automate Flow. So we're just going to cover off some of the other theoretical concepts relating to you know, how we go about creating different sort of flows. We'll also touch briefly upon business process flows as well as part of this. So as we saw, we can select and use an existing template in the Power Automate portal, and there may be certain scenarios where we've got you know, maybe a fairly common requirement that maybe somebody else has already created or Microsoft has provided an example for. Or even if we're just wanting just to do some initial exploration into, you know, what Power Automate flows could do for our organization, looking at some of the various different templates and just getting familiar with them and setting them up could be a potential benefit. So we can use the search box at the top to find different sort of sample flows, and it's just a few steps, a few clicks just to get that installed and set up in our environment. So to re-emphasize some of the important concepts, and these apply to our cloud flows only. So don't always remember that a cloud flow must always have one and only trigger in there, and that we must have at least one or more actions as part of the flow. So if we try and create a flow with a trigger and no action, then we'll get an error for that. Triggers are effectively the things that kick off our flows and could be a variety of different things. Excuse me. It could be, you know, whenever a new record enters a database, it could be maybe once per day. It could be, you know, based on a manual, you know, press of a button, as we saw a second ago. Lots of different options there that we've got available to us. Actions likewise will be the things that we want to actually happen within the flow, and we can see we've got lots of different diverse array of different actions that we can use and apply against our flow. And we're not limited to just using, a set of actions for one service. Where we start to get the real value with this is when we're mixing and matching the different services together, and we can start to do some pretty interesting and useful things as well if we put our minds to it. Aside from the actions that connect out to different services, we'll also have various different what we would call sort of control actions that we can add into our flows. And we saw an example of this in the demo a short while ago when we saw our sort of conditional flow on there. So we can effectively evaluate conditions, and then from there sort of go down either a yes or no type branch, based on what we want to do within our particular flow. We can also implement more advanced control types as well, which are generally aligned towards the typical things that we do from a programming standpoint. If we were to maybe write some C# code or something like that. So we can do things like, looping through until a condition is met. We can do like switch statements where we're evaluating a single value and taking different actions based on what that equals. We can perform a certain action until a condition is satisfied. When we're working with lists of records, so maybe we have pulled in or queried Dataverse and we returned, let's say, 10 records, we could go through each of those 10 records and perform a specific action involving them. And finally, and similar to, actually not similar at all, but what we can also do within Power Automate is also write out various different sort of expressions. So just to give you a quick taster into that, if we return back to this flow over here, so if we go back onto the dynamic content pane again, what we'll see is we've got an option to the right here for expression, and here we can write out various different sort of formulas using different functions that can perform different sort of purposes. So we can do things like maybe some conditional a conditional type sort of evaluation. We can convert data between different types. We've got some math-based functions, being able to get the current date and time. That's quite a handy one there, which you use quite a lot. Lots of different sort of functions that we can sort of use to, again, it's really just about ensuring that we can, parameterize and dynamically control how our flows perform based on, what our requirements are. So this just to make things more challenging, this particular language on here is different from what we saw earlier. It's not going to be the same as our PowerFX formula language. It's a sort of official name, if you're interested, is the workflow definition language, or WDL language. It's shared with Logic Apps, and there's a great resource on the docs website that goes through every single one of these formulas in a bit more detail. If you're looking for something a bit more visual, then if you check out Matt Collins-Jones, or MCJ, he's got a series of different videos on YouTube where he goes through and he basically gives a demo of each of these different ones and how to use them. So that's some really good sort of visual based content if you're interested. So this slide here just goes over again some of the ways in which we can trigger our different flows. And really, from a flow standpoint, we're not really sort of running these in the same sort of ways as we would for a Power App. We're not going to go on and hit the play button, and maybe do lots of different steps, as part of that. This is going to be something that typically will be running and managing itself behind the scenes. As the appropriate conditions are met, it's going to go off and it's going to do what it needs to do. As I say, these are the three principal trigger types that we would work with as part of this. The scheduled one is a particularly good option because particularly if we're doing some form of like batch processing. So if we're wanting to go off and maybe once per day, go into our Dataverse environment, maybe check some details and maybe update some records, then this is potentially a good trigger action for us to look at. And what's quite nice is that we've got a few different flexible options in terms of how we build out the schedule. So definitely look at that if you're wanting to run something on a fairly regular basis. In terms of how we would build out a scheduled flow, I can just show you very quickly before we do need to move on. The only difference is that we would just go into, so if I just go back to my flows for a second, the quickest way of being able to create a scheduled cloud flow is just by clicking on new flow here, selecting scheduled cloud flow, and then we can see we get the options here. So we can set maybe a start date, maybe in 2 weeks time. Or is that 2 weeks time? Oh, it is, yeah. That threw me there. I always forget that February's 28th, so it's a short month, isn't it? Yeah, and then from here we can then maybe run it on maybe odd days or weird days, Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday every week. Do it on a per month basis, every day, every hour. Quite a bit of flexibility there. And then when that's been created, we can then see the configuration on there, and we're then free to maybe just modify that if it's not quite what we want. Excuse me, and we'll see the different options start to emerge, and we get a nice little sort of text summary preview that shows us, okay, this is going to be, when it runs. So we can start being very sort of specific. So, run at 3:30 and 6:30 a.m. on Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. Bit of a crazy schedule that, but it's up to you. It's your flow, it's your rules. So nothing, and then from there, just build out the various different action steps in the same way that we saw earlier. Okay, let me just get the slides back up. Sorry, bear me a moment. We saw an example of this with the button flows. So you can look to call these from within the portal, but they're also designed to work quite well within the mobile application. So if we go onto our app store of choice on our Android or our iOS devices, we'll find that the Power Automate app is on there. When we sign in, we can then see a list of all the different flows and also all the different button flows that we can select. And we can just press those at any time to execute the flow. Some of our button flows will have additional input details, as we saw in the demo earlier. So that'll be the point where we are then prompted to then provide those, and that'll then go off and then alter the behavior of our flow based on how we're using that. And we've already done a demo of that one, so we will propose we go over that again. So yeah, the approval engine, this is one of the really nice, well, at least I think anyway, one of the nice things about using flow is that you've got the ability of being able to create these different sort of approval flow types, and they can be quite flexible in terms of how we build them out. So we can have it so that an approval gets sent out via email. It'll appear in the user's inbox as a sort of nicely rendered adaptive card, so they can just approve it there and then and provide some text. Approvals can also be sent out via Microsoft Teams as well and be approved that way. And we can have different sort of rules apply, have it so that maybe one person has to approve, have a series of users who need to approve it in order. Lots of different flexibility on here. And we've already seen as part of the demo how we can use this functionality. So definitely worth looking at if you are envisioning doing any similar kind of automations in your organization. This sort of stuff can really help you out and get you going very quickly. So again, we've already discussed this in a bit more detail, so I'm not going to propose we do a demo, and for now we will just move on. So business process flows then. So this will be where we've got maybe a set of defined and agreed steps in the organization that we always need to follow to get us from maybe point A to point B. And typically these will also work quite well when we know we've got specific information points that we want to capture at each stage of the process. So we'd use a business process flow, and we typically would use this in conjunction with a model-driven application to be able to build out and drive this type of automation. We can use this to have as many different stages as we want in our particular process. We can have different sort of branching conditions set up to be able to control how this all sort of looks and works. And really, it's all about just ensuring that we've got that consistency and that people know what they need to do in order to get to the end of a particular process. So as I mentioned earlier, these are used quite extensively across the different Dynamics 365 customer engagement apps. So for example, in the sales app, you'll have the lead to opportunity sales process, which the name implies is all around just getting us a customer sort of qualified and get them converted into maybe a live account or customer. and we're free within the Power Platform to set up as many of these as we want. As I say, the main requirement is that the environment must have Dataverse against it. And it's also recommended that we have a suitable model-driven app set up as well to be able to use these, although that's not a strict requirement as part of this. So let's have a quick demonstration of BPFs using an example which I should have here earlier before we move on. So if I go down to here, I think there's one in here. Yep. So if I'm just going to go into my this app over here and just hit play. So in this app, I've just got a table called events. So if I start a new record like this, I'll see that I'll have or I should see a business process flow appear at the top like so. So this effectively is just a sample process, maybe just for some event management type functionality. And for each of these different steps, I've got different data entry points that I've specified that need to be supplied before I can then move on to the next step. So in this case, maybe I need to give my event a title. So maybe just want to call this, I don't know, PL-900 bootcamp as an example. Hit the save button. And then from here, I can then move on to the next stage in the process. And what's quite nice about these business process flows is that we can have them cross different tables in the environment, and then we can link it all together that way. So it could be that once we've got the event organized, we need to then have the sessions booked. So I can then go off and then create the appropriate session. So a session could be maybe, I don't know, module 1, introduction to our platform with, I don't know, 10 attendees. We can then save that. At any point, I can maybe navigate back to the previous step and then view the corresponding record, then jump back ahead again like so. Move across to the next stage, which takes me back to my original record like so. I can then just update this roll-up column on here to indicate the total number of attendees at the event. And then when I'm all done and dusted, I can press on finish, and then this is all completed. What's also quite nice is that we have metadata for this stored behind the scenes, so we can see exactly how long it took us to complete, how long we've been at a particular stage, various other useful information points. And then quickly from a design standpoint, if I was to go in and edit this existing business process flow, this is how things look. Again, just give it a second because I think it might have gone to sleep again. Again, now's a great time for questions if you've got any. Okay, so it's loaded now. So yeah, so for this particular one, we've got just 3 different stages on there. We've added in a couple of different data steps. Then on the components tab down here, if I wanted to, I could just drag on additional stages, drag on additional sort of data points. If I wanted some conditional branching, so maybe skip ahead a few stages if certain conditions are met, then I can also drag that in. We can also call out call a flow step as well, as and when we enter a particular stage, and therefore trigger automation behind the scenes. So it's quite easy and quite flexible just to customize our BPFs depending on the scenario that we're faced with. And as I say, they'll typically go hand in hand with our model-driven apps. That's where we can drive the most value out of their usage. So any questions on business process flows then before we move on? Okay then, so that